Hi everyone, welcome to episode 30 of the Startup Playbook podcast. My name is Rohit Bhargava, and each week I interview successful founders, investors, and subject matter experts on how they got started, the strategies they use to succeed, and their advice to current and future entrepreneurs. Before we get into episode 30, this will be the last podcast episode for 2016. I just wanted to say a quick thank you to all of you for supporting the podcast for the last 30 episodes. I have some exciting guests and new initiatives lined up for 2017, but would love to get your feedback and hear what you like, don't like, or want to hear more of in future episodes. Feel free to shoot through an email to rohit@startupplaybook.co with any feedback, or if you just want to say hello. So to wrap up 2016, I sat down with Adam Jacobs, the co-founder and managing director of The Iconic, Australia's online destination for fashion and footwear. Adam has a great story in leaving behind a successful career at BCG to co-found The Iconic, and in this episode shares a range of thoughts on topics such as the key factors to long-term growth, the importance of customer experience, why you should hire for values versus skills, why retention should be your first focus, and overcoming customer fears. Without further ado, here is my interview with Adam Jacobs. Hi Adam, welcome to the Startup Playbook podcast, and thanks for taking the time to be here today.
Hi Rohit, thank you, and it's good to be here.
So for those people that may not be as familiar with you or The Iconic, can you share a little bit of your background story?
Sure. So 5 years ago, I co-founded The Iconic with three colleagues from my former job, which was consulting at the Boston Consulting Group. And so that was October 2011 that we created The Iconic. And ever since then, we've been focused on setting a benchmark in customer experience when it comes to online shopping, not only in Australia, but also globally too. And that's really been our focus over the past 5 years, building Australia's leading customer experience-based e-commerce company.
Perfect. So you mentioned that the three of you came from BCG. Can you talk a little bit about what sort of instigated you from leaving the company to start The Iconic?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd been in consulting about 4 or 5 years. I spent a few years with PricewaterhouseCoopers and then a few years with the Boston Consulting Group. And with BCG, I transferred from Sydney to Copenhagen. And while I was over in Copenhagen, I was doing a bit of retail work in the European market, and it became really clear that there was this huge divide in progress between e-commerce in Europe and e-commerce in Australia. And then when we looked at America, we saw that America was also really far ahead of Australia too. It's probably like a 3 to 5 year gap in terms of the sophistication of the e-commerce offerings. So it became really evident that Australians were being underserved when it came to online shopping. And I became quite interested in the space, started chatting about it with a few of my colleagues at BCG, who would all work together on various projects. And we were approached by a German venture capitalist who were actively investing in building e-commerce companies, not only in Europe, but around the world. And they were really interested in the Australian market. Their view was that Australia is a prime emerging e-commerce market. It's got high internet penetration, high smartphone penetration, stable economy, great disposable income, pretty decent retail margins. And all of these indicators said, okay, Australia is one of the next continents where e-commerce is going to take off. So they said to us, look, we're familiar in e-commerce. We've got the capital. Why don't you guys leave your jobs, move back to Sydney, because we're all dispersed around the world. We'll give you the funding and you start the company. And that was a really hard decision for me. It probably took 2 months of really going back and forth over that call. My plan. I mean, I'd always been an entrepreneur at heart, and I'd built some really small things here and there. And my plan was always to move into entrepreneurship at the right stage. But I was really enjoying the work at BCG. I was learning an incredible breadth and depth of problem-solving skills and just business skills in general. And I'd also been sponsored to do an MBA, and I was sort of in final rounds with 2 programs in the States that I was really excited about. So I was sort of facing this quite traditional on one hand, but also prestigious on the other hand career through BCG and an MBA that I was excited about and felt comfortable with, and that plan was completely disrupted by this idea and then an offer by a venture capitalist to return back to Australia only 5 months after I'd left and start The Iconic. And I think you're often defined by those kind of decisions in your life. There's really like sliding door moments, or those swing moments where left or right makes a really big difference as to what happens next. And so, being a fairly analytical person, I made reams of pros and cons lists, and they didn't really help me out. And in the end, I took advice from a very good friend who said simply, what do you want to do when you wake up in the morning? What would make you more excited? And thinking about the opportunity to build a company based on customer experience, and in a very new field for Australia, that idea was just so exciting for me. And thinking about the opportunity to build a at-scale company with a culture from the ground up, and with strategy from the ground up, and operations from the ground up, that was really exciting to me too. So I thought, you know what, I'm just going to take a risk. It doesn't feel like the right time in my career because I'm excited about these other things, but I'm going to shelf them. I'm going to take a risk, and I'm going to move back to Australia and start this company. And hindsight's always a convenient way to look at life. But looking back, that was one of the more definitive moments for me as an entrepreneur, because I found that I did have enough resolve to sacrifice other opportunities in order to chase down a dream.
Sure. So, I mean, it's really interesting that you're kind of talking about the sort of mindset and what some of the other opportunities were for you back 5 years ago. And I'm sure there are some listeners as well who are in a similar stage. They've got a lot of opportunities and they're on a current path within the corporate landscape, but have an idea or want to kind of look at pursuing a startup. Do you have any kind of words of advice or anything that you can sort of recommend to people in helping make that decision?
Yeah, I mean, the way that I like to sort of look at life, and I guess a career in general, is through two lenses, which are hopefully quite contrary to traditional ways of looking at life and work. The first lens is in looking at a career as a maze as opposed to a ladder. A lot of people like to think about their career as a ladder. They have an end goal. They've sort of reverse engineered it to figure out what the next 5-10 steps are to achieve that goal, to walk up the ladder. And so that goal might be an entrepreneurial one. You want to start a company at some point, and so you decide that to start that company, you need a certain set of skills or experience, and you go about acquiring those skills and experience in preparation. Or it could be about a typical career where you're an expert in a certain field and you sort of want to move up the ladder progressively. My view is that life just doesn't work out like that. And more often than not, because you're learning as you go, you're presented with a set of new opportunities every year that were not known to you or even expected by you beforehand. And if you keep defaulting to your ladder, then you'll miss the opportunity to iterate and to things. The reason I describe it like a maze is because typically what happens is we're faced with one opportunity or one decision at a time. And the most important thing is just whether we go left or right at that point in time. So really, for me, our career is like us walking through a maze, making a series of left and right decisions. And if we make the right set of decisions, we eventually move in the direction that we want to go. The second lens I like to look at it is this point about how do you make the right left or right decision. And I think often we're driven by what I would call social currencies in how we make decisions around our career. And that currency could be wealth, so, chasing a higher salary. It could be reputation, chasing a higher title. It could be respect. So, you want your friends to respect you for whatever it is, starting a company. It could be material acquisition. You take an opportunity because it's got lots of great perks that you're excited about. And so on and so on. And I think these are the wrong currencies with which to decide upon how you spend your life. I mean, ultimately, this is going to sound like a cliche, we don't have a huge amount of time on this earth. We probably have 50, 60 years in our working life. And if you just step back and zoom right out and think about that time as a macro period, I think it's interesting to ask yourself the question, what do I care about and how do I want to spend that time? What kind of an impact do I want to have over the course of 50 or 60 years of my career? And so with that in mind, my view on whether you turn left or right at each step of the maze should really be guided by your values and by your sense of purpose. What is it you care about? What are you attracted to? Where do you want to contribute? I think that's a really important question. How do you want to contribute? And therefore, what's the right move, left or right? So for me, just to wind back to that decision around, do I continue a traditional BCG to MBA sort of consulting professional path versus do I start a company? Some of my values are I'm naturally a very creative person, and not creative in the sense that I am a designer. I'm in fact a terrible drawer, but I'm creative in the sense I love to create things. I love problem solving. I love building. I love growing. I'm really, really interested by social psychology, and there's a lot of social psychology in retail and how people make decisions around buying and what they want to buy. And I'm fascinated by how organizations can impact systems around them and, in fact, change systems around them for the benefit of the end user. And that's what we've done. We've impacted the system of online shopping, online retail, to provide a better experience to the end customer than what they were getting before. And so I was naturally drawn to this opportunity to build a company that could really play out some of my values. And therefore, while it felt on paper like the wrong decision, it was almost like an asymmetrical risk decision where the downside felt larger than the upside because I was giving up so much to do something that had very high risk factor involved. It also felt like the right decision because I knew I was sort of making it with my gut and with my heart, aligned to my own values and my sense of purpose.
Sure. On the flip side, and I've spoken to a couple of my podcast guests about something similar, is do you think your experience at BCG, were there any specific skill sets or knowledge that you were able to transfer from your time at BCG to running The Iconic?
Without a doubt. I mean, I frequently say that without my time at BCG, I would not have been successful in building The Iconic. There are some really fantastic skills and tools that I picked up by working in such a high caliber group of people on such an interesting set of problems. That meant that I had the agility of mind, the agility of problem solving, discipline, the confidence through solving interesting problems in the past, and the approach to leading that would inevitably be successful in a unpredictable, volatile, uncertain, and changing, emerging industry, right? Because we were stepping into a space that was not predictable. It was new and it was emerging, and so to operate successfully in a space like that, you've got to have a very disciplined problem-solving skill set and a very disciplined set of operating principles and approaches. You need to really bring consistency and diligence to a space like that. And so I learned all of that through both BCG and also my time at PwC. Having said that, I'm a really, really strong believer in there is no blueprint for success that people should run out and try and emulate. Everybody has a different story. Everybody has a different skew in terms of their personality, their values, their skills, what they're naturally good at, what they're naturally not good at. Everybody has a different mission of what success looks like to them, what they want to build, what they want to contribute. And so simply because it made sense for me to spend 4 years in consulting, and then when the right opportunity came presenting itself, even if I wasn't ready for it, to jump on board and take that chance, it doesn't make sense for other people. And just to run one example, I have a really, really close and old friend. He's probably my best friend from childhood, called Ben Kieran. Ben is an Australian entrepreneur who's been very successful in Silicon Valley. He's been obsessive about consumer technology and consumer products since he was like 12 years old. He was one of those early kids on the bulletin boards before like anyone knew what bulletin boards were. He experimented with Bluetooth technology when he was like 16 years old before anyone thought it had a commercial application. He built out a Bluetooth network in Broadway Shopping Centre to test some use cases. Eventually, he went on to founding a company called Chomp, which built search algorithms and was bought by Apple and now powers the Apple's search on the iTunes store. And then having been at Apple as a senior exec for a number of years, he's now out building another startup himself in a new space. Now Ben dropped out of uni. He had no foundational formal training. He just had a obsessive passion for a space and an incredibly bright mind to be able to work things out himself, and a lot of energy to bring people on the ride with him. And he's been tremendously successful in doing that. So I think more important than thinking about what a blueprint for success looks like is thinking about what authentically do you care about and how do you follow what you care about in a way that it brings the best out of you. I really cared about problem solving. And so going into consulting was a great way to flex my problem solving muscle. I loved looking at a diversity of problems, finding complex problems, figuring them out in the nitty gritty detail. So I followed that passion. Ben really loved just playing with technology, getting hands-on and inventing new uses of technology, and he followed that path. And inevitably, both paths have worked out for us because they're the ones that have fit who we are as people.
Fantastic. And obviously you've mentioned this several times, but just 5 years ago when the Iconic started, the landscape of e-commerce was very different in Australia. Can you talk a little bit about what the early days of the Iconic looked like?
Sure. So when we launched, in fact, even before we launched, so around Q3 of 2011, we scanned around the different e-commerce markets around the world, and we saw in Australia that e-commerce was mostly a price-driven game, and it ended up being what we call the first wave of e-commerce. Price-driven in the sense that the value proposition was jump online for a bargain, shop at eBay, it's cheaper, shop at OzSale, Deals Direct, Groupon. All of these propositions were about shop online because it's cheaper. When we looked at other markets, in particular Central Europe, the UK, and America, what we saw was what we ended up calling the second wave of e-commerce, and that value proposition was about service rather than price. So the value proposition was jump online because it's a better experience. You have access to a broader range of products. You don't have to spend your Saturday down at the store fighting for parking and battling through crowds. And you can enjoy things like really, really fast delivery, guilt-free, risk-free return policies, and really great mobile experiences, just to make it an overall better shopping experience. And we were really inspired by that. And it touched, I guess, some of my core values around customer experience. When I was at high school, I worked every summer in a local, it was like a kiosk at a local beach, serving lots of people over the counter. And I just kind of grew this appreciation for delivering really great customer experiences in a retail environment. And that resonated with all of our teams. So we set about the task of, okay, if we think Australia is lagging behind in the service-driven e-commerce proposition, how can we be the protagonist of that second wave of e-commerce in Australia? How can we go out there and set an example of what a great e-commerce experience looks like for Australians? We very quickly centered on 3 different pillars of what we thought would construct a benchmark online shopping experience. The first pillar, and probably the most important pillar, was our assortment of products and brands. One of the main benefits you have in e-commerce is that you're not limited by shelf space. And so you can be much faster and smarter in learning about what brands and products customers are looking to shop. There's lots of data sets available, search data, social data, trends on your own website, what people are browsing. And when you put all this together, you can create a range that is far superior than what a bricks and mortar retailer could put together, because they have to plan out a year in advance. It's very hard for them to be agile, and they're limited by shelf space. So we now stock over 700 brands, both Australian and international labels, and that's more than both David Jones and Maya put together. So we knew that putting together the definitive range of fashion for Australians, of both local and international designers, was what was going to really put us on the radar of Australians, such that whenever they search for Nike shoes, they see the Iconic pop up, and we have the product they're looking for. The second, so that was the first pillar, our product assortment. The second pillar was, delivery and returns. So we really wanted to shake up this paradigm that Australians were living in of you shop online because it's cheaper. And to do that, we thought to ourselves, we have to come out with something really unexpected, something that will change the way Australians think about online shopping, and reset it to a service orientation away from a price orientation. We did that through delivery. We felt that delivery was a pain point in the existing e-commerce experience. Most customers were waiting like 2-3 weeks for their products back in 2011. We felt it was an area of potential innovation, that we could really get into the detail of the supply chain to figure out how you totally reimagine an e-commerce warehousing and delivery operation to be way exponentially faster. And we felt if we were able to do that, it would become a passion point for customers. They would get really excited about it. They'd tell their friends about it, and it would start reorientating how they think about e-commerce. So we first tested that out through free overnight delivery around the country. We saw that our customers responded really well to that. They loved it, and they were talking about it on social, and it was bringing them back to our website. We were then approached by one of our courier partners who said, hey, we do 3-hour delivery for some of our other clients, including medical emergencies, delivering organs. And we think we could do the same thing for you guys, delivering shoes and dresses. Now, you can imagine at first I was a bit taken aback. I was thinking, well, shoes and hearts aren't exactly the same thing, and not sure if someone needs their shoes in 3 hours in the way they might need a kidney in 3 hours. But it fits in line with what we're trying to build here. So, why don't we just test it out and see what happens? So in December 2011, in our first Christmas, we started testing 3-hour delivery. We didn't make it public on our website that we were doing. We simply gave a free upgrade behind the scenes to Sydney customers during the week, from overnight delivery to 3-hour delivery, and then we measured them to see how they would behave as a result. The result was astounding. I mean, everyone just went nuts for it. And later on, what we discovered was that when you sell a really emotional item or emotional product like fashion, which is literally connected to a sense of identity, because you're buying a piece of your future identity, we found when you put that together with a really great paradigm-breaking experience like 3-hour delivery, whereas you used to wait 2 weeks, now you get it in 3 hours, that we could create this incredible sense of excitement and joy and promotion and advocacy of our brand. So that was a big focus for us in our first 6 months. How do we innovate around delivery and returns, and again put us on the radar of Australians? The third pillar of how we thought about building a great experience was technology. We often say that we're 3 companies in one. We're a fashion company, we're a logistics company, and we're a technology company. And more the technology company aspect is driving our future and driving our the way that we think about innovating online shopping into the future. So we decided very early on that we wanted, as a part of being a technology company, we wanted to fully in-house all of our tech. We now have a 60 or 70 person technology team. Back in our first year, even then we had 20 or 30 people. We built all of the core stack that we operate on in-house so that we can innovate fast. And we focused heavily on mobile. We saw early on that our customers love shopping on their phone, browsing and shopping. And so we made sure that we made a fully responsive website that was mobile first. In 2013, we launched apps for both iOS and Android that were really successful. So in 2015, we did a reboot of our more dominant iOS app to add even more cutting-edge technology in it. For example, we're now focusing on personalization of the shopping experience within the app. And so over time, we've continued to focus on how do we set the bar in tech? How do we have a highly stable, highly fast, really intuitive, really easy user experience website so that it's just a dream to shop on, whether you're on a phone or whether you're on a tablet or a desktop. And it adds to the convenience of the online shopping experience. So to answer your question, they're the 3 pillars: our product assortment, our logistics innovation, and our technology innovation that we focused on in the first year. To add, really first year and even up until the 5th year, to add one other point to your question there, Rohit, we also scaled really, really fast in the first year, much faster than we expected. We went from not existing to 200 people within 6 months, and we were the domestic market leader in online fashion within 9 months. And that was really a result of timing. We hit the market at the right time. It was also a result of having a venture capitalist behind us who was supporting fast growth. So we had the capital to support that kind of a growth curve. But it was incredibly challenging to manage. We were learning the business as we were going, and we were scaling it at a rate that was faster than our learning curve. So one of the big things we did in years 2, 3, and 4 was try and actually slow down the growth a little bit. I mean, we were still growing double year on year, but slow it down to a controllable zone so that we took the time to build the right foundations of the business, to learn it back to front, so that we knew as we were growing it would scale efficiently and not scale out of control.
Sure. So you've mentioned how things have how things have kind of evolved for the Iconic, especially in terms of scale. Can you talk to some of the challenges that you've had in terms of scaling the company that quickly?
Yeah, I can. I mean, there were lots. There were lots of challenges involved. I'll give you an example of a operational challenge we faced, and then I might talk more broadly in retrospect about strategically some challenges we faced. So operationally, what happened because we grew so fast was we constantly miscalculated how long our warehouse would last us. So at the end of 2011, when we first launched, we were using a space in the back of our office in Surrey Hills. I think it was like the 2nd of January 2012, we then moved to a proper warehousing facility that was about 1,200 square meters. We thought that would last us a year. It lasted us 3 months. 3 months
Wow.
later, we had to move to another one that was 4,500 square meters. We thought that would last us a year. It lasted us, lo and behold, 3 months. And after those 3 months, we moved to the one we're in today, which is about 19,000 square meters. And we're nearly out of space in this one, and we'll be moving warehouse early next year to one bigger again. To move warehouse between 4 warehouses within 6 months was the hardest thing I've done in my entire life. I mean, it basically meant that we were completely rethinking all of our operating processes and people and infrastructure on almost a live basis. Because, it takes more than 3 months to set up a warehouse. So all we were doing was rolling through 4 different spaces and not even finishing the setup of one before we move on to the next one. It wouldn't have worked if we didn't have a quorum of incredibly passionate, talented people who went through that growth challenge with us and worked literally night and day to make sure that the customer never knew what was going on. They didn't know that we were moving spaces so frequently with so much work behind the scenes, and we were still delivering on time the product that they ordered. And so, we had to literally move the world in order to make that work. And that was really challenging in hindsight. That was one of the reasons why we then slowed down our growth, because it was unsustainable. We made it through it because we had fantastic people supporting the growth and really doing everything that needed to be done to not let our customers feel the pain. But it wasn't a sustainable way to grow. On reflection, the strategic lesson I've also drawn from growing that strong or growing that fast is the ability to scale. It really comes down to who your people are and who you have in key leadership positions. Because we grew so fast, we recruited really, really quickly. We just needed bums on seats to try and manage this growth. And our recruitment as a result was quite reactive. From years 2 onwards, we started becoming much more proactive about our recruitment around, who are the right types of people to assume leadership roles in our business to make sure that it's built in the right way and it scales. And the difference when you have someone who's not equipped for a role and someone who's a high performer in the role, performing the same job, the difference to the business health and its ability to scale is monumental. It means that person understands the systems around them, understands what needs to be done to lay down the foundations, understands what the next wave of growth looks like and how to prepare for it, contributes to the culture, supports the people around them, supports the learning curve of the company. Everything changes overnight when you have the right person in a job. What I learned was how to find that right person. And in the early days, we would hire predominantly for skills. So we'd say, okay, we need a senior search engine marketer. We're going to find someone with a killer CV on search engine marketing. Now, that's important. It's important that someone has the skills for the job. But what I learned over the years was that it's not sufficient. It's not enough to predict whether you've hired the right person for the job. What's even more important to layer on top is their values and whether their values match the organization's values. And I'll provide one example. One of our values is we are true to our customers. And that value is really about customer empathy. It's understanding what matters to our customers, what they value, what they care about, and therefore how to build an experience that is just designed purely for them and their enjoyment and they get really excited about. Now, in times in the past, we've hired people with incredibly strong skill sets on paper, but they didn't have a high degree of customer empathy because it wasn't one of their values. One of their values might have been around how they figured out a process, rather than first asking our customers what they wanted and then designing the process for those customers. When we started realizing that and started hiring against our values, for example, hiring people with high degrees of customer empathy, everything started working. Because we found people not only with the right skill sets, but who thought about our business in the right way and who connected with their peers left and right of them on a common set of values. So I'm a really, really big proponent in as a result, in hiring for values over skills, in making sure that you get the right leadership group who have a common set of principles around what a great business looks like, and can scale that business together and move through all of the challenges and the teething issues that you get when you're growing a business double year on year.
Sure. So obviously people, in-house people are one of the key pillars to scaling a company successfully. The other is customers. Was there any sort of specific strategies that you used or anything that's worked for you that you can share that's helped the Iconic grow its customer base so quickly?
Yeah, sure. Once you have, so my view on like how do you understand growth in terms of customer segments, and how do you set a strategy for customer growth, a successful strategy for customer growth. My view on that is, if you're an operating business, then you should first look within before you look without. So once we had a couple of years of operation under our belt, so let's say in 2014, 2 years after we founded the business, 2 or 3 years after we founded it, we took a step back and we asked ourselves this very question. We said, okay, things are going pretty well. We've scaled up to a certain size. I think at that point we probably had around 3 million people across our website and apps on a monthly basis. And we said, okay, how do we now really like take it to the next level? We set ourselves a goal of being $1 billion company by 2020. We were on track for that goal, but it was still early back in 2014. And we wanted to know how we were going to get there and what customer growth we needed to focus on. What we did is, because we had a few years of operating experience, is we looked into our existing customer base. We looked at which of them, how they performed and behaved differently within their segment. So we looked at which were buying more often, less often, what the average basket sizes were, what the average profitability was. And once we got a good understanding of all that, we then looked at the external market and we said, well, where do we think the headroom is? What are the industry players, such as the banks that produce industry reports, what are they saying about the composition of the e-commerce market across age groups, across socio-demographic breakdowns, across product categories, across geographies? So we built this picture that started off with an understanding of our existing customer base, and then we layered on top a macro or an external picture of where we think there might be headroom for growth. When we put those two things together, it clearly pointed us towards what segments we needed to focus on for growth. And those segments, as we define them, are primarily 25 to 35-year-old fashion forward, so they shop full season, full price product, mostly urban, mostly mobile shoppers. Now, that wasn't a big change from the group we were already serving, in fact. And I think that often companies think they need a grand strategic plan of accessing new markets, new geographies, new customer types or segments in order to achieve growth. The reality is in most emerging businesses, which are often in emerging markets, the market is still very fragmented, and there's a much more tangible growth opportunity by focusing on your core business and consolidating market share and growth within that core business, which ideally you're really good at, then stretching yourself into new lines of business, new customer segments that carry all sorts of unseen and hidden complexity and unseen and hidden costs that you're just not aware of and you can't predict at the time that you make that decision. So there was a time that we branched out. We branched out into travel goods, into luxury goods, into cosmetics, into kids wear, into all sorts of sporting equipment. And we pulled back on all those fronts. And we said, you know what? There is so much growth in just our core fashion product for our core customer segments that we're gonna make it our priority to be the absolute best business to serve that market. We're already serving it, but we only have 3-5% of it, and we want 30-40% of it, and that's where we're going to focus. So I think that would be my main advice in hindsight, is to first look at what you're doing well already and to learn from that before you start reaching for new fields and new frontiers.
Sure. Especially for early stage businesses, I guess there's a really strong focus on customer acquisition. Is there a time that you think that the focus shifts from focusing purely on customer acquisition to also looking at retention of the customers that they have?
The way I think about it is that from the outset, retention needs to be a priority and a focus. You never want to have a time in your startup or your business from day one where you don't feel like you have good retention metrics. And the reason, and we call this leaky bucket theory, the reason for that is if you're putting new customers in a bucket and that bucket has holes and they fall right back out again, you're wasting money on acquiring those new customers. So you want to have a watertight bucket such that customers stick around and they're retained before you go and spend money on acquiring more of them through paid channels. The other thing about focusing on retention from day one is it almost forces you to create a strong business, because customers' retention is the ultimate measure of whether you have a great product market fit. If you do, they're sticking around, they're coming back, they're telling you their friends, they're proud advocates. So I think that rather than thinking about acquisition versus retention as a binary set of priorities, first you start on an acquisition, then eventually you move to retention, I think you should think about it with retention as the base that is always there and is always strong. And as soon as you feel or you see that it's not strong, you make it your number one priority to understand why and to resolve it. When it comes to acquisition marketing, I also think acquisition should always be a focus. I think it should be the second focus after retention. And I think it can be focused on in lots of different ways. So the best way to think about your customer acquisition strategy is through what's your success measure of it. And there's lots of different ways to measure success of your acquisition strategy. You could think about the cost per customer acquired. You could think about the cost to income ratio of that customer acquired. You could think about the lifetime value of that customer acquired. There's a number of ways you can structure your success metric around acquisition. And I think those different ways of measuring it should sit as phases of an acquisition strategy over time. At the outset, you probably just want to get people on board to start learning from them and seeing what they like and they don't like. At the very end, or I guess at the mature end of a business, you want to really be focusing on incremental lifetime value. How are you acquiring customers that are going to perform over a lifetime period? So I think that the level of sophistication when it comes to customer acquisition strategy should start simple at the outset and then build to sophisticated as you become a mature business. But it should always sit on top of a really sort of rock solid foundation of retention metrics and a retention focus.
Sure. And so you mentioned earlier that when The Iconic was initially starting out, the market was looked at e-commerce more as a price, more from a pricing point of view, and you were moving into a more service-based model. Were there any challenges that you faced introducing that new model or the new way of thinking for customers at that time, and how has that evolved over time?
I think there was some credibility issues when it came to the e-commerce industry in general that as a player in the market, we had to help overcome at the outset. So back in 2011, people were still asking questions like, is it okay to buy online? Is it safe? Are my goods going to come? Are these guys for real? Are these products for real? A lot of questions around legitimacy and credibility of the business model in general. What we wanted to do was to take out a lot of those risk factors from the customer's decision-making process. So when you already have a somewhat skeptical customer who may not have shopped online before, and then on top of that, they start asking questions like, is it really worth the delivery cost? What if I try it on and it doesn't fit? Am I able to return it? Do I have to pay for the return? When you add on those type of questions, then often you see that customer bouncing, saying, you know what, too hard basket, I'm just going to go down the street to a local shop instead. So what we did to combat some of those fears and concerns and some of those, let's say, conversion barriers or conversion friction in the shopping process was we defined very, very simple, unique selling propositions that on a targeted basis combated those fears. So free overnight delivery gave you the comfort you didn't have to pay for the shipping and it's going to come really fast. Free 100-day returns gave you the comfort that you could shop risk-free. Doesn't matter if it doesn't fit, whatever the reason is, just send it back. We pay for the postage on return. So that's a big risk that we take out of the equation. And then when it came to payment and credibility of us as a website at the outset, we borrowed credibility from some of our partners. We partnered with high trust organizations like the NAB Bank, like Visa, like PayPal, like Australia Post, like Google, and we would often use our partners' logos and names as credibility builders at the right point in the process. So, for example, we were signed up as a Google trusted store, and we would have that as a little pop-up on the homepage. So as soon as you landed on our website, you would see that we were trusted by Google. On checkout, we would feature prominently the NAB and PayPal logos, so the customers felt comfortable that this was a safe and well-partnered checkout experience. When it came to delivery, we would display the Australia Post logo, so customers knew it was coming with a credible delivery partner. So I think through that two-pronged attack, the first one of having really clear selling propositions that combated some of the friction in the process, and the second being leveraging the credibility of our partners to build credibility ourselves. I think through that we were able to help overcome some of the fears of shopping online.
Fantastic. And so obviously, fast forwarding to today, there's a lot of competition as consumers have gotten a lot more accustomed and are a lot more comfortable with shopping online. How does a company like The Iconic stay ahead of the competition?
It's a great question. How do you stay ahead of the competition? And I genuinely think there's a right way and a wrong way. I think the wrong way is to frantically explore and experiment with crazy blue sky stuff that you comfortably label as innovation and you feel good that you're doing innovation. There's this quote that I really love, and the quote is, we cannot predict we cannot predict the future, but we can create it. I think when people start thinking they can predict the future and predicting what the fashion industry, for example, is going to look like in 5 or 10 years' time and what we need to do right now to be ahead of that curve, they put themselves in really, really high risk positions and exposed positions where they're chasing down an unproven strategy that has just as much chance of not eventuating as any of the other 1,000 odd predictions of the future you might come up with, and therefore weakens their competitive stance. I think what strengthens your competitive stance and the right way to compete in a fast-changing world is by identifying the drivers of your business that are making it successful and are making it work for your customers, and you just focus on extrapolating out those drivers into the short and midterm. So, for example, if we know that stocking the right brands and products on our website is one of the primary drivers of our revenue growth and our customer retention, then rather than trying to predict versions of the future, we should be thinking about what's the next thing we can do to improve the offering of our brands and products, to improve our understanding of our customers' demand and to meet that demand. And how can we innovate around that core question that we know is an important question because we already see that it leads to performance. So that goes back to the earlier point I made around looking in before you look out. You're in control of things inwards, and you have full transparency of things inwards, and therefore they're often much better sources of what a strategy should look like than when you look outwards, often at second or third degree sources, often at unproven strategies, often at hype in the industry. I guess that would be the advice I would pass on.
Adam, thanks a lot for your time and sharing your insights today. For anyone that wants to get in touch with you or follow you or The Iconic story, what's the best way for them to do that?
So you can follow The Iconic on LinkedIn. We're actually very active on LinkedIn. We love publishing lots of content about what we're doing behind the scenes. So you'll find The Iconic on LinkedIn. You'll also find myself, Adam Jacobs, on LinkedIn. And they're two really good ways of staying in touch. Otherwise, we're also quite active on Facebook and Instagram as a brand, and you'll find us there too.
Perfect. I'll make sure that the links are on the show notes. Adam, thank you once again for your time. That's been tremendously insightful.
Thanks, Rohit. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to episode 30 of the Startup Playbook podcast. You can find the show notes of my interview with Adam along with a curated list of tools and resources for startup founders at startupplaybook.co. As always, you can join the conversation through our Twitter account. The handle is @PlaybookStartup. As mentioned at the start of this episode, I would love to hear from you. You can reach me via email at rohit@startupplaybook.co or on Twitter. I'll add these links into the show notes for you. So that's it from me. I hope all of you have a wonderful Christmas and New Year break. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date with our latest episodes. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you at episode 31 in 2017.